Well, let's start, though, with the back page of the Daily Mail then, and the headline, Blue Murder, Lampard on brink as booze and smoke canisters rain out at mutinous Goodison. Dominic King at Goodison Park. They were 16th when he came in, Jonathan. Does it feel like they're going to be 16th when he goes out? What's your sense of the situation?
Well, that's the point, really. They were 16th when he came in, and almost a year on, he's kind of taken them precisely to the same place. And there have been ups and downs. He obviously kept them up last season. That was a huge moment of communion. It felt like Lampard and Everton had kind of, and the Everton fans had sort of bonded, and a lot of that momentum was carried into this season. But it's results like tonight's actually that can be the death knell for a manager, because the manner of that collapse, I think there were 3 goals in 7 minutes. Those are the sort of moments that can break that connection between a coach and the fans. And it felt like the beginning of the end at Goodison tonight.
Yeah, David, the reaction as well from the crowds, there's a sense they've been quite patient with Frank Lampard, but booze and smoke canisters raining down at Goodison Park after that burst that Jonathan referenced there, 3 goals in 7 second-half minutes. Is that significant? Do you feel that the flavour of the fans will perhaps be the deciding factor?
Well, of course, the fan sentiment will play a huge part, but I think tonight it was more directed at the board. There were chances of sack the board, and I think that is reflective of an animosity that is built up among the Everton fan base towards those running the club. There have been changes of manager. There's a new stadium on the way. There's been underperformance. There's been huge spend. There's not been a huge amount of communication from ownership level. There's been changes in the sporting structure behind the scenes, the director of football. And as Jonathan says, there was a real defining moment in a positive way at the end of last season with Frank Lampard dancing on the stadium, quite the opposite tonight. But I sort of feel to myself, how many times can Everton change manager and expect that to be the solution? Yes, Frank Lampard, as the article suggests, has a worse win percentage than any of his 7 predecessors dating back to David Moyes, but that's just the statistics. If you speak to people at and around Everton, they speak of him inheriting a real mess there, and he's popular among players. I spoke to Damari Gray for an interview a while ago, and although he was actually very loyal to Rafa Benitez, who had signed him, he'd learned to love Frank Lampard, and I think that's the same with a lot of the players. There seemed to be hope when they got that draw at Manchester City just a few days away, but now they face a defining few days. They go to Manchester United on Friday in the FA Cup. I suspect Frank Lampard will get that match. I certainly think he should. But beyond that, there's a Premier League game against Southampton, bottom of the table, and then West Ham too in the same region. So these are critical days for Frank Lampard, of course, in his managerial career.
Yeah, absolutely. 7 games without a win, 5 defeats in that run for Frank Lampard's Everton. Back page of the Telegraph continues the theme with a slight twist on the Mail. Chris Bascombe at Goodison Park humiliated Lampard on the brink. Everton manager in trouble after 4-1 Brighton drubbing. Club board could decide his fate ahead of that United Cup tie. And Chris Bascombe says Frank Lampard's future as Everton manager hanging by a thread after the humiliating 4-1 home defeat by Brighton and Hove Albion. Jonathan, do you feel, reference to the board there, and as David says, the anger coming from the fans directed mainly towards the board, is it an illustration, Everton, of money badly spent, perhaps in contrast to clubs like Newcastle?
I think it's an illustration of years of dysfunction, but possibly even decades. I mean, it was Brian Clough who famously said that any chairman or any owner who sacks a manager that he appointed should also sack himself. Of course, that's never been the case in football. And if it comes down to throwing up Frank Lampard as a kind of a sacrificial offering to the fans, or taking an introspective look at their own failings, well, for this Everton board, there's only really going to be one answer to that. And Chris Bascombe, at the Telegraph, very well connected. Possibly the shortest man in football journalism. But I don't know what the Opta stats are on that. But no, and he's extremely well connected. He will get a sense of how close Lampard is to the brink, and the fact that it's being reported in these kind of terms. You get a feeling for these things as a journalist and as a fan. That when a manager has kind of run out of rope, and it feels like Lampard's pretty. He may get a game or two, but it feels like he's kind of run out of tether.
David, where would that leave Frank Lampard after his time at Derby County and Chelsea and now this stint at Everton? Would it be a career rebuild from this point if he were to lose his job?
Well, there's mixed views on how he did it at Derby and Chelsea too. Certainly Chelsea qualifying them for the Champions League despite their transfer ban. But there was always a sense that he was a holding solution for them because of that sanction. And then he gets the Everton opportunity, having been in the frame for a few others, I think, maybe Aston Villa and Norwich among them. And he's still young in the managerial game, and he's a very popular figure. He's an engaging guy. He's well regarded throughout the industry. And so you suspect if he doesn't continue for longer at Everton, that he will get further opportunities. But these are, of course, massive blows and dents to his reputation. But again, you look at tonight's opposition, Brighton. They're a club that is built so well in a way that Everton really haven't in recent years, and they're a model for clubs like Everton. It shouldn't be that way given Everton's history and their length of stay in the top flight, but they are, and that was always going to be a tough assignment. We perhaps saw a glimpse of what Frank Lampard was capable of with this Everton team at the Etihad Stadium, but then he changed formation. It hasn't quite worked out. Not so long ago, they beat Crystal Palace 3-0 at home at Goodison Park, and he was the toast of the place. And so these things can change quickly. But as Jonathan says, unfortunately, in these scenarios, whether you like it or not, it's not the board that tends to pay with their jobs. It's the managers. I just think in this specific case, Everton need to think very carefully, because they've tried that on a number of occasions now and it hasn't worked. A look at the recruitment, the spend, the players that have come in, a change of director of football from Marcel Brands to Kevin Thelwell, and still the same story. And you can understand the frustration on the Everton fans. And also those images are so iconic in the papers with the blue smoke. It's going to take some coming back from this.
Certainly is.